Basically, every single group of amniote animal has adapted to aquatic habitats. You've got your waders, the ones that aren't adapted for going in the water, but still nab some munchies from the sidelines. These are the critters that don't like to get wet. Then you have your sub-aqueous foragers, the critters that like to get wet but aren't hardcore deep divers. They love to suck up soft-bodied water beasts or scrape slimy algal plants off rocks. Lastly, you have your deep divers. These are the critters that aren't quite as hardcore as fully aquatic animals, but love to go touch the bottom of the pool and snack on anything that moves. These types of aquatic ecologies have popped up independently dozens of times throughout the evolutionary history of life on Earth. When it comes to the dinosaurs, these different ecologies have also popped up independently dozens of times among the birds. Herons are the waders. Ducks switch between subaqueous foraging and deep diving. Then you got the freaks like boobies, gannets, and cormorants that might as well be flying penguins. Also, there are penguins. With the sheer diversity of aquatic ecologies that have popped up in living dinosaurs, there must be countless lineages of extinct dinosaurs that led to these modern divergences. There are. Even the oldest avian dinosaurs, like the ornithuromorph birds, have examples of aquatic adaptations. That being said, those adaptations are surprisingly rare among the non-avian dinosaurs. Traditionally, and still mostly to this day, dinosaurs have been hypothesized to be stuck to the land. They were a bunch of filthy, heavy-footed, fat-bottomed landlubbers, and they knew it. They took full advantage of every possible specialization or generalization that the land could provide, but rarely took to the water. Some researchers have come up with hypotheses to explain why the non-avian dinosaurs were averse to the water or the water's edge. One possible explanation, among many, is that they were simply mechanically restricted to terrestrial living. Maybe their musculoskeletal anatomy just couldn't easily adapt to the water like avian dinosaurs can. That being said, there are always exceptions to any rule, and a handful of dinosaurs have been found to carry some aquatic, semi-aquatic, or near-aquatic adaptations. All of these critters remain controversial. The main subject of this video, the most uncontroversially aquatic, and the main subject of a brand new study published in March of 2022 by a huge international group of scientists, is the mighty, fin-backed, thin-snouted Spinosaurus. Spinosaurus has entered the news yet again, and according to hints by the intrepid Nizar Ibrahim, will be doing so again and again in the near future. I've discussed the many hypotheses surrounding the very few and rather fragmentary bones of Spinosaurus and closely related spinosaurs many times. The last we heard of the aquaticness of Spinosaurus was a paper by Dave Hone and Thomas Holtz that suggested the evidence in favor of a semi-aquatic to aquatic crocodile-like lifestyle for Spinosaurus was either weak or ambiguous. Those major skeletal characteristics used to propose an aquatic lifestyle for the beast include the conical dentition, retracted nostrils, shortened hind limbs, paddle-like feet, fin-like tail, together with more ambiguous evidence from isotopic analyses of the teeth. Adapting to an aquatic habitat is evolutionarily costly. It requires a major evolutionary transition and transformation of many different parts of the body over a very long period of time. In even the most aquatically adapted groups, whales and marine reptiles, it took millions to tens of millions of years to get their current highly aquatic state. Many of these modern aquatic animals and plenty of early fossil taxa of the most aquatic groups show very little skeletal differences over time. As a side effect, many aquatic critters show rather little major anatomical indicators of being aquatic, as in the earliest walking whale ancestors or the modern hippos. This therefore makes it plausible that many of the non-avian dinosaurs traditionally considered to be terrestrial beasts were in the early stages of becoming more and more aquatic. They just don't show it in their bones. Since you cannot easily or reliably assume an aquatic or amphibious lifestyle from bones alone, or the outside anatomy of those bones, other methods and proxies must be made. One such method, which is fast becoming the #1 hard data in paleontology, is histology, or osteohistology. Histology is the study of microscopic tissues in living and once living organisms. In paleontology, this is usually done with bones, rock saws, and polishing the slices of the bones down into chips to glue to a slide for analysis. It's one of the best ways to strongly infer ecology, diet, growth, age, and more based on what we already know about living animals and what can be inferred from overall anatomy of the bones themselves. When it comes to being aquatic or amphibious, the best thing to have is control of your buoyancy. A fully terrestrial animal will readily float. To counteract the floatiness of your usual terrestrial animal, some organisms adapted heavier bones. A variation in the density of the bones allows an amphibious or aquatic animal to sink under its own control. This condition of dense, heavy bones is called osteosclerosis and occurs when the bone deposits more layers of bone inside it. This condition often occurs alongside pachyostosis, which is the thickening of bone. The presence of osteosclerosis, pachyostosis, or both have been used to infer an aquatic niche in many animals from extinct lineages, such as crocodiliforms, avians, marine reptiles, and whales. In the past, the histology of bones and presence of osteosclerosis has been used on a clade-specific basis. The new 2022 study by Matteo Fabri, Guillermo Navalone, Roger Benson, Diego Pol, Jingmei O'Connor, Bjart Anjan Bahujar, Gregory Erickson, Mark Norell, Andrew Orkney, Matthew Lamana, Samir Juri, Justine Becker, Amanda Emp, Cristiano Dal Sasso, Gabriel Bendalini, Simone Maganuco, Marco Auditor, and Nizar Ibrahim found that a very broad dataset and series of tests of this osteosclerotic condition was in order. Though the media vultures have focused almost entirely on Spinosaurus, anyone who actually bothered to read the study would find that the study intended to find new data regarding the aquatic adaptations of other non-avian dinosaurs inside and outside the Spinosaurid group. To create this massive dataset, the researchers needed to quantify bone density. In other words, they needed hard mathematics and measurements of different parts and sections of bones that positively correlates to bone density and thickness. They used measurements from the shaft of the femur bone and the base of the ribs for 297 living and extinct animals. The data. Instead of trying to simplify the math done in this study, I figured I'd walk through it and simplify only individual parts of it. In this way, I can help explain what was done, which will then provide a better background from which to understand the conclusions and interpretations made from the results. So, the research team decided to compare alternative explanations for the variation in bone density between the 300-some taxa they used in their dataset. To do this, they used what is called a corrected ICAIC information criterion-based model. This is a statistics-based mathematical method for evaluating how well a model fits the data it was generated from. It is used to compare different possible models and determine which one is the best fit for the data. Hence my reference to the researchers comparing alternative explanations. The model was used in a comparison of what is called phylogenetic multiple regressions. Now, this method of multiple $5 words applies multiple regression techniques to cross-species data. It allows continuous and categorical variables to be tested for and controlled for. All of this helped to evaluate the influence of allometry on the bones using the maximum diameter of the femur shaft and rib base as a proxy for body size. Allometry, in its broadest sense, describes how the characteristics of living creatures change with size. The term originally referred to the scaling relationship between the size of a body part and the size of the body as a whole, as both grow during development. However, more recently, the meaning of the term allometry has been modified and expanded to refer to biological scaling relationships in general, be it for morphological, physiological, or ecological traits. Each of the taxa used in the study were scored on two variables: sub-aqueous foraging and flight capabilities. Each were subdivided into 3 conditions for each variable. For subaqueous foraging, each taxon was scored as a 0, unable to subaqueous forage, 1, able to but infrequent, and 2, frequent. For flight, each got either 0, unable to fly, 1, able to fly but not sustained, and 2, sustained flight capable. They use these 2 variables, both of which are independently varying, as both flight and subaqueous foraging evolved independently of one another. For example, there are currently both flightless and flighted diving birds. Another reason as to the huge number of taxa in the dataset is to include critters that are indisputably subaqueous foragers, like whales and marine reptiles, as well as a few that are disputed. Having undisputed subaqueous foragers will help to figure out where the Spinosaurs might place, given a massive dataset including both distantly and more closely related living and extinct animals. The results. You can see the cross-section images of all the femori and ribs here. The team found that frequent subaqueous foraging is associated with thick, heavy, and dense femurs and ribs across all amniote animals. They found that infrequent subaqueous foraging and wading behavior are insignificantly associated with bone density. This finding is consistent with observations made of living dinosaurs. Wading birds that feed in water but don't submerge, like herons, have bones similar to non-aquatic animals. The data found that bone density decreases when the animal's body size increases, and that this association is found in flying animals. This goes to show something unrelated to the Spinosaur question, that weight reduction in the skeleton was important to the origin of active flight, whether in association with this transition or preceding it. Huge heckin' chonkers that live on land, like the absolutely massive mammals, and dinos that were just way too big, have some of the most heavily built and robust femurs. They need that stuff to support their rotundity. This almost goes without saying, but it is necessary to compare it with the conditions seen in fully aquatic animals. These huge land animals also have some of the least dense bones. They needed to save weight, otherwise they'd be crushed under their own weight. Alamosaurus and Tyrannosaurus both have hollow bones with some spongy bone within the cavity. In deep diving critters like the ichthyosaurs, mosasaurs, whales, and seals, the bones are far denser. They are also denser than those of animals that subaqueously forage in shallow water. In deep divers, the hard, dense, compact bone is replaced by what is called cancellous bone. Cancellous bone is spongy bone. In these deep divers, this type of super airy bone helps to avoid the complications of deep diving, like the bends. It can also help to increase the body's metabolism. I'll make one last clarifying example. Here is the cross-section of Deinonychus. The bone itself is dense. There are no air pockets, but there's a huge hollow cavity in the middle. Here's the cross-section of Tyrannosaurus. It too is encased by a thick layer of pocketless bone, but has some spongy, airy bone after that, and then a cavity. If we take a look at aquatic reptiles like this caiman, this large Eocene penguin, or this Champsosaur, you'll see that the bone has a very small hollow cavity in the middle. It is denser, but there is no spongy bone. Now, if you take a look at the cross-section of deep divers, the seal Calophaca and early whale Basilosaurus, you'll notice that the bone has little to no middle cavity, but has a lot of teeny little holes. This is that dense yet spongy bone that helps them avoid the bends. Now, obviously you can use other parts of the animal's overall anatomy to distinguish between wading, deep diving, and terrestriality, but only in conjunction with the internal structures of the bones. The dataset shows that bone density is a powerful tool for distinguishing subaqueous foraging abilities. So, what's new? What does this tell us about the Spinosaurs? Osteohistological data was collected for Baryonyx, the big-clawed, traditionally mostly terrestrial Spinosaur from early Cretaceous England, Suchomimus, a low-spined Spinosaur from Niger, and the neotype of Spinosaurus, the short-legged, fin-tailed skeleton from Morocco. The team found, contrary to many other previous studies, that the Spinosauridae family is the only family of non-avian dinosaurs to show unambiguous evidence of subaqueous foraging. Now that means that previous studies had either found no evidence or found evidence that was kinda iffy. This new one found much stronger evidence thanks to histology. In regard to specific Spinosaurid ecology, the team found that Spinosaurus had a 100% probability of subaqueous foraging based on femur histology and 95% based on rib histology. Surprisingly, Baryonyx had a similar 98% probability from femur histology and 96% probability from rib histology. Lastly, and doubly surprisingly, Suchomimus showed non-subaqueous foraging abilities with only a 31% probability based on femur histology. This is similar to other definitively terrestrial non-avian dinosaurs. This is weird because Baryonyx had been traditionally hypothesized as more of the wader due to its overall anatomy. It has longer limbs, as well as its phylogeny. It belongs to its own group, the Baryonychinae, that is split away from the more Spinosaurus-type Spinosaurs, or the Spinosaurinae. Suchomimus, on the other hand, has short forearms and hind limbs, higher neural arches, and is more closely related to Spinosaurus. It was considered a wader as well, but it seemed more like Spinosaurus than like Baryonyx. Yet here is evidence that suggests Baryonyx was a diver, capable of sinking beneath the waves and going after all sorts of aquatic prey items. This may also go against previous studies of Spinosaurus anatomy that suggested it was more adapted for wading than for diving and swimming after prey items. The overall anatomy of Spinosaurus just so happened to match up with its internal skeletal anatomy and match to the anatomical trends seen in most subaqueous foragers. Seems there's now more evidence in the semi-aquatic corner of the debate of what the hell Spinosaurus was doing with itself. That doesn't mean the wading model is dead, only that it is now less supported. Since the subaqueous condition is found in the bones of both Spinosaurus and Baryonyx, this suggests that this condition may be ancestral to the entire Spinosauridae group, thus making Suchomimus and any other airy-boned Spinosaurids an evolutionary split from the group. The feet of most Spinosaurs, including Baryonyx and Suchomimus, are incompletely known or entirely missing. The new evidence of subaqueous abilities in Baryonyx may suggest it had broader anatomical similarities to Spinosaurus it convergently evolved. In other words, most of the tail and both feet are missing from the holotype of Baryonyx. It remains possible and plausible that it had large webbed feet like Spinosaurus and a deeper, more paddle-like tail to help it maneuver through the depths. Suchomimus had a more completely known tail, but even here it is missing some good swaths of it. It's also missing its feet. This means it too could be hiding some more aquatic or near-aquatic characteristics. Now that the evidence has been looked through, what does it mean for how beasts like Spinosaurus moved in water? According to co-author Guillermo Navalon, or @gnavalon on Twitter, Spinosaurus was perhaps moving along shallow waters using a combination of bottom walking, like modern hippos, and lateral strokes of its giant tail. It may have used this means of locomotion not to pursue prey for long distances in open waters, but to ambush and catch very large fish like lungfishes or coelacanths. It remains a strong possibility that the Spinosaurids occupied a niche unlike anything alive today. It could explain why they've been so difficult to nail down for so long. Well, that, and how few of them are known to science, and that the most important one was bombed to atomic ash. Halschiraptor happenings. Paleontologist Andrea Cao, the guy who described Halschiraptor, pointed out that there is a possibility that bone density does not inherently correlate with the ability or probability of subaqueous foraging. Cao brings up the anhinga as an example. The anhinga is a water bird from the warm parts of the Americas that looks like a combination between an egret and a duck. They have hollow bones and fly, but routinely dive and swim to catch prey. Subaqueous foraging. Cao states that high bone density is likely a sufficient condition for subaqueous foraging, but it is not a necessary condition. At this point, I'd like to bring up why Cao came to criticize the paper. That's mostly because the Spinosaur paper used Halschiraptor and anhinga data in their dataset. This found that the bones of Halschiraptor, a goose-like Mongolian dromaeosaur long hypothesized to be semi-aquatic, had bones no denser than most terrestrial non-avian dinosaurs. This would mean it was more likely terrestrial than it was aquatic. Cow brings up a good comparison though between the bones of Halscaraptor and Anhinga, which may have been similar ecologically. Marcos Pinheiro, a Brazilian paleoartist and paleoenthusiast here on Twitter, replied to Cow's post about this by asking if tooth isotope analyses had been done on his goose raptor. You see, you can analyze the isotopes remaining in the fossilized teeth to get an estimation of the kinds of molecules that were laid down in the teeth as they grew. That provides ecological data. This was done on Spinosaurus not too long ago and pretty much suggested a diet of mostly aquatic animals that would change as the seasons did. To learn more about that study, watch my video on the topic. Well, there haven't been many isotope studies on Halscaraptor teeth because there weren't a ton preserved with the one and only specimen. Sampling isotopes from the bones themselves may not work as the technique uses teeth, but the teeth are extremely small and hidden within the skull and/or the hard sandstone matrix that made preparing the bones out of its block difficult to do. Most of the skeleton of the goose raptor was imaged with a synchrotron machine rather than taken out of the block, so not much more can be said on this case. Cow suggests that it remains plausible the goose raptor acted like geese or ducks in only submerging the neck and front of its body to feed, while the rest of the body floated. That would still work with the dataset produced by this study. Marcos Pinheiro then reached out to the lead author of this new paper, Matteo Fabbri, to ask a few clarifying questions about the research's implications. He also brought up the post by Cow. Fabbri retorts that Halscaraptor still has the same probability of sub-aqueous foraging as Tyrannosaurus or Allosaurus. Fabbri suggests that the Anhinga has an excuse for having low bone density, but still foraging below the water. It can fly. Halscaraptor has no such excuse as it could not fly. If it could not fly, then why does it have spongy, airy bone like that of a terrestrial non-avian dinosaur? Anything else used to suggest it was semi-aquatic, like the hand anatomy and neurovascular canals of the face, are characteristics that are also present on clearly terrestrial dinosaurs, so they aren't good enough pieces of data to declare the goose raptor to be a true goose raptor. The team, led by Matteo Fabbri, even coded the bones of the Anhinga as that of a diver, which agrees with Cow's argument. However, the data still brought Halscaraptor up as terrestrial. The next thing to do would be to do an isotope analysis on Baryonyx that may further provide nuance as to how Baryonyx was more aquatic than previously thought. Well, that's the gist of it. Spinosaurus is once again found to be aquatic, Suchomimus is less aquatic, and Baryonyx is far more aquatic. Only more research on different aspects of these bizarre dinosaurs' anatomy will continue to shine light on their mysterious biology. That and more specimens. Always more specimens. For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, hit the bell icon for updates, like this video, and drop a comment in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my elephant tier patrons, Ray, Isaiah Garza, Dinosaur, Christoph Hubinger, Biotaverse, and Arda Bayer. And another thanks to my Tyrannosaurus tier patrons, The Dogman, Iron Bladesman, Danny Van Heck, and Dana Manchester.